But in our culture, we don't think of an ecosystem as something that is providing us with everything we need in order to survive just because we are it. We think of it as something that produces commodities. We think of it as something that gives us markets and allows us to finance money, to do other things. So what we have then, and this is the way people are selling ecosystems in the empire culture. Again, from a sustainable perspective, with those other values and attitudes and beliefs, this makes no sense. Why ever would you try to commoditize Mother Earth? Come on, really? Yeah? That's what they're thinking. But we do this, and they just go, I don't understand. Until finally they do understand. And part of how that happens is this. We all start out observing our environment. In our culture, this is how we do it. Okay? We get out there, we get in the rafts, we get on scuba gear, we get our camera, and we go and we watch and we observe the environment. Every being on the planet. From the day we open our eyes, open our ears, begin to pick things up and taste them, we are observing our environment. And part of the purpose of social systems is to really expand the circle in which that observation takes place, so that it's always safe for the child until the point where the child doesn't need the adults to keep it safe. After a bit of time, we start to participate in the environment. We might participate in it by, being part of the flow. We might do, the windmill thing. These windmills have very little impact, believe it or not, very little impact on the way the wind moves, but they're participating in the natural environment. And yes, I know some of them are used for flood control, but we'll get to that in a minute. Right now, they're ways to have human life participate in it. Then we tend to modify the environment. This is terraces on a hillside that would have been just, a slope of grasslands, and now they've terraced it and they're growing specific grasses. This is another hillside where it would have been just one meadow, and we can see there is a little grassy area here. There's another kind of thing going on here, another kind of thing going on there, another one way down there, and we've got different kinds of trees growing around the edges. We've modified this environment. And most Western culture human beings, empire culture human beings, are happiest in a modified environment. We're actually very uncomfortable in a natural environment without human modifications. And it turns out most of humanity modifies their environment. When the British and the Europeans came to North America, they thought they were coming into a wilderness. Now, the people who lived there thought they were coming to their garden, the forest garden that they had been maintaining for generations. The same thing on the Pacific Northwest. The Europeans came to the Pacific Northwest. They see this wilderness, and the people who live there are going, welcome to our garden. But that communication didn't happen because it didn't even enter the Europeans' mind that managed environment could look like that, that one could manage a forest. Forest is by definition wilderness, yeah? And there were other factors there too. But we do tend to modify land, and then having modified it, we manage it. This is an ancient town, and another town, and another town, and another town. This is up in the Alps again. And they have managed the way the water flows, the way the fields are used, the locations of their houses. They've got urban growth boundaries, like Oregon. You can't build out there. You have to build in town. This is a very clearly, we've got woodlands near the towns, but not in them. We've got fields separated from woodlands. I love hedgerows. I think hedgerows are some of the best things that humanity ever developed. It's life forms to do very well in the hedgerow that then contribute to the well-being of the people and to the land. Is another way to manage what has been modified. This is another version of the plow. And it's doing it without doing a lot of destruction. I'm frankly not a fan of the plow, and we'll talk about that later when we get to this long-term one about technology and economics. But, as plowing goes, this is the most managing and least exploiting, because the next thing that we tend to do is exploit, and when we exploit, we just go in there and rip it all out. This was grasslands about 20 years ago. I happen to remember it. And these were a forest. The current technology of exploitation allows us to mow 7 trees down at a time. Of course, they have to be next to each other, so there's no selective harvesting if you're doing that kind of technology, and allows us to move mountains in days. And this is amazing. There's a whole mountain worth of dirt pulled out of here, a whole mountain worth of ore. That's a mine. And that's what exploitation leads to. The assumption that this is a resource for me to exploit so I can have, to go back to those values we talked about, so I can be the one with the most. Because that's what I value if I'm in empire culture. The unfortunate thing is, when we start exploiting the land, then we start creating difficulties. We start having to work extra hard to get what was easy once. Okay? This poor farmer has invested probably $30,000 in that piece of equipment. And that piece of equipment is putting stuff on those plants we do not want to eat. But he feels he has to in order to have a healthy crop. It's the only way he knows, in the environment that he's living in, to generate a crop, because the soil has been so depleted by the exploiting that has been going on in his valley, in his farm, all these decades. It's really only decades. If you think about farming prior to World War II, virtually no resources to produce the crops. And over a period of several decades, starting about 1950, going through about 1990, increasing resources to the point where it's almost impossible for a traditional farmer in the Western culture to generate crops without having to struggle. And after a while, there's nothing left. After a while, we create suffering. We've occupied the floodplain, we've destroyed the natural cycles, we've created droughts. It's just dreadful. And so when that happens, we leave. We leave. This is Palmyra, a Roman town. It was a major road stop during the Roman era. There were trees, there were fountains, there were beautiful fields. The stories are amazing. This is a town on the Silk Road, same thing. We kill the environment, and then we leave it. And that's been the way humanity in empire culture has been since empire culture started about 6,000 years ago. It's not the way a sustainable culture would do it, obviously, because we saw pictures last time of places that have been in the same, communities that have been in the same place, farming the land for 1,000 years. All right. So trying to give us a sense of the interaction of humanity with the environment. The environment shapes us to some extent. We have a huge impact on the environment, even when we do little things. And our attitude, whether we're going to go, I won't stay on the questions page here for a second, whether we're going to see ourselves as modifiers, whether we're going to see ourselves as participants in the environmental world in which we are operating, whether we see ourselves as needing to modify that, and most human beings do, whether we're going to see ourselves as managing stewardship of the resources, the environmental resources available, or whether we're going to see ourselves in these other ways. That's a huge part of the decision we have to make. And frankly, most of the people who are running the economic and technological developments in Western culture are expecting us to abandon Earth, move on to other places, and do the same things. And some people are saying the reason we're seeing what we're seeing on Mars is because someone already did that there. Isn't that interesting?